I am excited. I am excellent. I am believing in the power of the people and their resilience on tonight, whether we look at Virginia, which when you start to talk about this redistricting scheme, or attempting to rig the next election for the midterms, because we know that the policies that Donald Trump has pushed and all House Republicans and Senate Republicans have signed on to that have allowed us to be in this place in which economic harm is being felt by all, unless you are the top one percenters, where we know families are being torn apart. If you tend to be maybe a little bit darker, it is so it's so refreshing to see the people pushing back. And so while the president plays with AI videos and decides to dump poop on the people have decided that they're going to poop all over him. And so I fully anticipate we're going to have a great night with Proposition 50 here in California. We know that in Virginia, which it was a shock about 2 weeks ago or so, maybe not even 2 weeks, they announced that they would actually enter the arms race and try to pick up some Democratic seats, with them obviously expecting to have a strong and good night. And so far, Virginia has. So hopefully, after California passes Prop 50, and after we see New Jersey, and after we see hopefully the retention of judges in Pennsylvania, and as we see two new statewide elections that were won in Georgia, in places that haven't elected anyone statewide, and I think they said 25 years, outside of the federal level. I think that the people are expressing that they are fed up, and it's not even been a year.
Congresswoman, you talked about redistricting and talking about voters being fed up. There's been talk about you throwing your hat in the race to run for U.S. Senate in Texas in this midterm election. What is your response to the filing deadline is a month away?
It is. It is looming. But if you remember, and I think you probably will, I was basically the last person to enter the race for Texas 30. But once I got in, I was in and we ran hard and we were able to pull off a win in that primary. And so right now, I think that it is important for me to really get a pulse of the people. I think that we do have an opportunity, but number one, Kim Paxton has to be the nominee. That's just what it is. We need Kim Paxton to be the nominee. We know the National Republicans estimate that it will cost them approximately $250 million to win this election if Kim Paxton is the nominee. And so one of the reasons that I want to hold off a bit is number one, I want to see if the trend continues to hold, that he may most likely be the nominee. Number two, I think that if we continue with the same electorate that we've had for the last 30 years in Texas, that we probably should expect the same result. I think that we've got to do something different. We've got to be able to expand the electorate. And so we are about to be testing in a very different way. We just went through some things and we're going back and forth with the team that we have that's going to be doing that. But we're trying to see, can we really expand the electorate? And the final point that I'll make is that typically in Texas, we've had amazing candidates. And I honestly have nothing bad to say about any of the candidates that are running for US Senate right now. But what we typically do is we spend $100 million just so that people can learn their name. And basically, they end up spending all their time on the phones, raising money, and then running ads just where they're getting to kind of know people's names. What I've seen in the polling is that my name ID is super high, considering the fact that I've never run statewide in the state of Texas. So by the time we start, I just don't really feel like we'll be kind of at home base and up to bat, but instead we'll already be on second base and we'll be able to kind of move into the next phase of the election and really start to prosecute the case. And knowing that Donald Trump is at the helm, and that whether you're from rural Texas or urban Texas, you are feeling pain alike, whether it has to do with the farmers and therefore they are losing, or a number of them are filing bankruptcy as it relates to their farms, or whether we're talking about the people that need that food on their tables. Everyone is hurting, or whether we're talking about healthcare and the fact that in rural Texas, we know that a lot of those healthcare facilities are going to potentially be shutting down because they just won't be able to sustain themselves, or whether we're talking about urban Texans who cannot afford the cost of health insurance anymore. It is time for us to point out what brings us together instead of focusing on what separates us. And I think right now, no matter if you identify as a Democrat, Republican, or independent, you just want somebody who will fight back against what's going wrong. And right now, I think it is very clear, especially with the election results that we're seeing today, that the one thing for sure that is going wrong is Donald Trump. And the one person that absolutely has a record for always being willing to call out Donald Trump and fight back is me. Well, at the same time, I must be honest. If John Cornyn is the Republican nominee, it makes it very interesting. Most people don't know that Cornyn and I work together quite often on bills. We've done stuff around food security. We've done stuff around fentanyl. We've done actually a lot of legislation together. Now, Ted Cruz and I don't work together hardly on anything, but me and John Cornyn actually work together. So it would be an interesting dynamic if it's the two of us. And then it would be a really interesting dynamic if it's Paxton.
Congresswoman Casey Stegall here. As you know, there are 17 agenda items on the ballot in Texas, constitutional amendments, and it looks as the early information is coming in that all of these are passing quite easily. What do you make of that?
You know what? I will tell you that we've seen record turnout. It looks like at least higher than anticipated turnout so far when I've looked at what's taking place in Dallas County. I'm going to be honest. I don't know how well versed people were on all of the constitutional amendments. But what it seems like I am sensing in general is that people do not want to miss an opportunity to show up to a ballot, even if they're not fully versed. And sometimes with those constitutional amendments, as someone who came from the state house, the way that they ultimately phrase them, everything always sounds so good. It just does, right? But without having the benefit of talking to, maybe some state reps and finding out kind of the backstory and kind of the potential, some would call them unintended consequences, and some would say the intended consequences of some of these things. We'll see. But I don't know that there was a lot of campaigning around any of these amendments in the state of Texas. And I think a lot of people were just like, they said there's an election. We're really upset with what's going on. Let's make sure we don't miss the election.
Congresswoman, it's Sean Rabb, my friend. Good to see you. Let me ask you about your power and your influence. You endorsed in Texas 18, I believe, and not only in Texas, but around the country. Congresswoman, your voice, your influence has been weighing in on candidates. You talk about expanding. Is this one of the expansions to find the kind of candidates you talk about would not continue to be the quote unquote traditional party?
A little bit, but more so just, I think that people trust my judgment. I don't think people look at me as just your everyday politician.
Of course not.
And they trust me to be authentic with them. And so when I said that, in Texas 18, there were 16 candidates. And a lot of people were like, there's 16 people. And some of them didn't know any of the people, right? But this is a historic seat. I obviously had a relationship with Sheila Jackson Lee. I also had a relationship with Sylvester Turner. And so I saw the people that they interacted with. I saw kind of the way that they felt like they needed to represent for Texans 18. And I know multiple people in this race, and I made it clear to people all around as I was down in Houston campaigning on behalf of Christian Menifee. And I said, it's not really about like who I know the best or who I like the best or anything like that. It's about who I feel like is best for this position in this moment based on everything that I know. And I just couldn't think of a better candidate than Christian Menifee. And I felt like it was important, especially since this is such a historic district. And right now, as we know, Section 2 is under attack as it relates to the Voting Rights Act, as the Supreme Court is going to decide whether or not, basically the last pillar of the Voting Rights Act will stand. I do think it's important holding a Section 2 seat out of Dallas County, that if I had any strong opinions that I weigh in. And people have actually said stuff about the fact that that made their decision easy. I remember when Christian first decided to run, I actually tried to convince him not to run. That's a whole other story. But he immediately wanted my endorsement and he knew that he would get it. But I told him we've got to be strategic. And I said, it is hard for me to gauge how people feel about me all over. I'm a data driven person. And when you run down the rabbit hole of X, I seem like the demon spawn, right? But then you may go over to
Yeah.
TikTok or Instagram and it's different, right? So I'm like, I don't know what's real. And, as I've traveled the country as a member, we've had conversations with allied countries about the concerns of those that aren't friendly to our country that have engaged in the bot farms. And they really have done a very good job of driving people to kind of these hateful kind of corners, right? And so it is hard for people to know what's real and what's not. So I said, before you put me, because of how high my profile is, and I know that certain news outlets love to just run hateful things about me, you need to test and make sure that I won't hurt you in your district. And when he got the numbers back from the polling, he's like, "Nope, my district absolutely loves you." I was like, "All right, well, let's go, let's get it." And it was fun. I love this. It's not the first time I've been down to Houston to campaign for a candidate. Usually by the time I get in, I see something very special in that candidate, whether it's a state house race, whether it's a mayoral. I've actually been helping out some places more silently than others. But I'm really excited for tonight and what it means for America. And I think that we are going to continue this trend. I also know that once the Democrats start to get into power, whether it's state power, city power, county power, or federal power, we have to deliver. I think the one lesson we should have learned is that it's not good enough to have the best ideas. We've got to actually deliver on those ideas. And we've got to be just as aggressive to do good for the people as the Republicans have been doing bad to people. So I am looking for aggressive folk to come into the fold who are ready to actually do the work on behalf of the American people.